if you were dropped into England 1500 years ago, you would not last a week. No government to call, no law to protect you, no doctor if you fell sick, no shop if you ran out of food, no road that could guarantee you'd reach the next town alive. The great empire that once ruled this land had collapsed, and what was left behind was silence, ruin, and fear. Historians call this period the Dark Ages, though the name is a little misleading. It has nothing to do with the sun. It refers to a darkness of information. After the Roman Empire withdrew from Britain in the early 400s, written records nearly disappeared. What we know about this era comes from fragments, a few chronicles, some archaeology, scattered clues left in the dirt. For roughly 600 years, England went from being part of the most advanced empire on earth to a patchwork of small, fragile kingdoms fighting simply to survive. When the Roman legions left Britain, they took more than soldiers with them. They took the entire system that had held daily life together. Trade routes broke down. Currency lost its value. Towns that once bustled with markets and public baths were left half empty. Their stone buildings slowly stripped for materials by locals who no longer had the skill or the need to build anything so grand themselves. Into that vacuum came waves of new settlers, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, arriving from continental Europe. Some came as raiders, many came to settle, farm, and build new communities on land that Roman order once controlled. Over time, their language and customs reshaped the very identity of the region. This is where the word England itself begins to take root, from Angleland. The transition was far from peaceful. Small kingdoms formed and clashed from the ashes of Roman Britain, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, fierce independent territories constantly negotiating, fighting, and shifting borders with one another. For an ordinary person living through this collapse, the world must have felt genuinely frightening. The empire that had provided order for nearly 400 years was simply gone. No central law, no unified currency, no guarantee of safety beyond the walls of your own village. A cluster of timber and thatch homes, a handful of families, fields stretching out toward the tree line. This was home for the overwhelming majority of people living through the Dark Ages, and life revolved entirely around the seasons. Spring meant planting, every hand in the family working the soil, because a poor harvest didn't mean tightening your belt for a few weeks. It could mean starvation by winter. Summer was for tending crops and praying the weather cooperated. Autumn was harvest, the most critical stretch of the year, when the gap between survival and disaster was measured in bushels of grain. Winter was simply endurance, short days, brutal cold, and a quiet, constant fear that the stores wouldn't last until spring. Disease moved through these communities with terrifying ease. Without any understanding of germs, illnesses we would treat today with a simple trip to a pharmacy could wipe out entire families in a matter of days. Infant mortality was staggeringly high, and many children never saw their first birthday. But hidden inside this daily struggle was another burden almost nobody talks about. The sheer physical filth of medieval life. It is easy to picture the wars and the famines. It is much harder to picture what it actually felt like and smelled like to live in a world with no running water, no toilets, and no showers at all. For a peasant family, the most basic human need had no clean answer. There was no dedicated room for it, no privacy to speak of. Most homes kept a simple wooden or clay pot somewhere inside, sometimes only a few feet from where the family slept. When it filled, someone carried it out and emptied it into a ditch, a pit, or, in the more crowded towns that survived from Roman times, straight into the street. People walking below learned to move quickly and glance upward, because a shout of warning was often the only notice before waste came pouring from a window. The street itself became a kind of open channel, filth pooling along its edges, seeping into the mud that everyone walked through every day. The fortified halls and strongholds of local lords and kings offered something slightly better, though not by much: Stone chambers were sometimes built, jutting out from the walls, positioned over a moat or a steep drop below, so waste would fall straight down and out of sight. These were called garderobes. They were cold, dim, and draughty, and the smell had a way of creeping back into the living quarters, no matter how far the chamber was pushed from the rest of the building. Strangely, nobles used these grim little rooms for another purpose entirely, hanging their finest clothes. The ammonia fumes rising from below were believed to kill the fleas and moths that infested fabric. So the robes of the powerful often hung only a few feet from where they relieved themselves, a small, uncomfortable irony sitting right at the heart of medieval status. A popular myth says that people in the Dark Ages never bathed at all. The real story is stranger and a little more forgiving. In wealthier households and in some monasteries, bathing did happen. Communal bathhouses existed in religious communities, and grander homes sometimes kept large wooden tubs lined with cloth, filled slowly with water heated bucket by bucket over a fire. But heating enough water for even a single bath could consume hours of labor, so it remained a rare event, reserved for special occasions, sickness, or those wealthy enough to command the servants and fuel required. For the ordinary peasant, washing meant a quick rinse of hands and face in the cold water of a nearby stream or well. A full wash of the body might happen only a handful of times in an entire year. As the centuries passed, a curious belief took hold that water itself could be dangerous, that hot water opened the pores of the skin and let disease slip directly into the body. Dirt in this strange logic was treated almost like a seal, a layer of protection against the outside world. So instead of washing, people masked. Households with any means filled their homes and clothing with dried herbs and flowers. Lavender, rosemary, cloves, carried in small pouches or hung from the rafters. Perfume was not vanity in this world, it was a tool for daily survival. Picture a crowded gathering on a feast day or holy day. Bodies packed close together, none of them washed in weeks, the air thick with sweat, smoke, and the sharp sweetness of herbs fighting a losing battle against it all. That closeness of unwashed bodies was not only unpleasant, it quietly helped disease travel from one person to the next, a danger nobody at the time understood. Villages under threat. Within this hardship, something remarkable was also happening. Communities were rebuilding structure from nothing. Local leaders emerged. Basic systems of justice and land ownership slowly reformed, recreating pieces of what had been lost when Rome withdrew. But it wasn't only nature, disease, and filth that people had to fear. There was another danger, arriving from the sea and from rival kingdoms alike, and it would define this era just as much as any famine ever could. As Anglo-Saxon kingdoms solidified their power across England, they spent much of their energy fighting one another, each attempting to expand territory, claim resources, and assert dominance. For the people caught in the middle, a change in ruling kingdom could mean new taxes, new laws, or a raiding party burning through the fields overnight. Then, starting in the late 8th century, an entirely new threat arrived from across the sea, the Vikings. Norse raiders began striking England's coastline with terrifying speed, hitting monasteries first because these religious sites were often wealthy, poorly defended, and packed with valuables. The raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 sent shockwaves through the era, a moment chroniclers described with genuine horror, and it's often marked as the true beginning of the Viking Age in England. Over the following decades, these raids evolved into full invasions, with Norse settlers carving out entire territories in the north and east of England, a region that came to be known as the Danelaw. Out of this relentless chaos, a new kind of leadership began to emerge, strong, often ruthless figures capable of uniting fractured territories and organizing real defense. This is the environment that eventually produced figures like Alfred the Great, a king who didn't just survive Viking invasions, but began the long, difficult process of unifying England into something resembling a single nation. violence, as brutal as it was, ended up accelerating the very thing that would define medieval England: centralized power, fortified towns, and the early foundations of the kingdom we'd recognize today. Amid all this bloodshed, filth, and uncertainty, one institution remained remarkably stable, and it would end up preserving the very knowledge that lets us understand this era at all. While kingdoms rose and crumbled, monasteries quietly became islands of stability in an unstable world. Monks devoted their lives to prayer, farming, and writing. In an age where literacy was rare and record-keeping had nearly vanished, monasteries became one of the only places where knowledge was actively preserved, manuscripts painstakingly copied by hand and protected within monastery walls for generations. The church also provided structure, education, charity, medical care of a kind, and a shared moral framework that helped hold fractured communities together in a world without any strong central government. It's almost poetic that the very Viking raids terrorizing England also targeted monasteries specifically because of how much they held, and yet those same monasteries again and again managed to survive, rebuild, and continue quietly preserving the written record historians rely on today to understand this poorly documented era in the first place. All the pieces of a much larger catastrophe were already gathering: overcrowded towns, waste running through the streets, rats thriving in the filth, fleas leaping from those rats onto human skin. It was only a matter of time, though that reckoning would not fully arrive until later centuries, when the Black Death swept through England and killed a staggering portion of its population within a few short years. No one at the time understood germs or bacteria, but a pattern became impossible to ignore. Filth and death seemed to travel together, town by town, street by street. Slowly, painfully, the first sanitation laws appeared, restricting where waste could be thrown. The first real crack in a way of life that had gone unquestioned for generations. What remains? The people who lived through England's dark ages were not weak, and they were not dirty by choice. They were doing the best they could with what they had, rebuilding a shattered world from almost nothing, surviving the collapse of an empire, enduring hunger and disease, fighting off invasion after invasion, living without running water or a single flushing toilet, and still finding a way to raise families, build communities, and quietly preserve the knowledge that would one day let us tell this very story. By the time this era finally gave way to the medieval world of castles, kings, and knights, the foundation for all of it had already been laid, brick by painful brick, in centuries most people know almost nothing about. And the next time a hot shower runs over your shoulders or a toilet flushes without a second thought, it is worth remembering just how long and how hard won that simple comfort really was.